The day my own children told me I was useless to them was the day I realized that 50 years of maternal love could be discarded like yesterday's newspaper. I remember standing in the foyer of the home where I had raised them, my arthritic fingers clutching a small suitcase, while my son Robert avoided my eyes, and my daughter-in-law Melissa tapped her foot impatiently on the hardwood floors I had polished for decades. "We just don't have the space or time to take care of you anymore, Mom," Robert said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "The kids need the guest room for their activities. And frankly, your medical appointments are becoming too much to manage with our schedules." I stood there, 73 years old, recently widowed, and suddenly homeless. The grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from my late husband James, ticked loudly in the silence that followed. How strange that the home I had poured my heart into for decades could suddenly feel so cold, so foreign. "I understand," I lied. Though my heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces, what I didn't tell them was that I had understood far more than they realized for quite some time. I had seen the whispered conversations, noticed how they scrutinized my bank statements when they thought I wasn't looking, observed how they'd begun to treat me as a burden rather than a beloved mother. As I stepped out onto the porch, Melissa called after me. "We've arranged for a taxi to take you to Golden Sunset Retirement Home. They're expecting you." Her voice carried no warmth, no regret, just the relief of someone offloading an unwanted responsibility. I turned back one last time, my eyes sweeping over the familiar facade of the Victorian house that James and I had scrimped and saved to buy when Robert was just a toddler. The rose bushes I had tenderly cultivated lined the walkway, their blooms nodding in the spring breeze, oblivious to the human drama unfolding. "You know," I said quietly, "your father always said that life has a way of coming full circle." I smiled, a small knowing smile that seemed to unsettle them both. I suppose we'll see if he was right. As the taxi pulled away, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something unexpected stirring within me. Not just grief or betrayal, but a slow-burning determination. They thought I was a helpless old woman, too feeble to fight back. They had no idea what Claudia Reynolds was capable of. No idea at all. My name is Claudia Reynolds, and until 6 months ago, I was many things. A retired high school English teacher, a widow of 2 years, a mother, a grandmother, and, I thought, a cherished member of my family. Now it seemed I was merely an inconvenience. I was born in 1950, in a different America. My generation was taught to save, to sacrifice, to put family above all else. James and I married young. I was barely 20. And we built our life brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. We had Robert when I was 23, and our daughter Elizabeth 2 years later. Those early years were lean but happy, our small apartment bursting with laughter and dreams. When James received a promotion at the engineering firm, we finally had enough for a down payment on the Victorian house on Maple Street. It needed work. The plumbing was ancient, the wallpaper peeling. But it had good bones, as James liked to say. We moved in during the winter of 1978, and I still remember carrying 4-year-old Robert across the threshold, his eyes wide with wonder at the grand staircase and high ceilings. For 40 years, that house was the center of our universe. Birthday parties in the backyard, Christmas mornings by the fireplace, homework at the kitchen table. I tended my garden while James restored the original woodwork. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, secure in our little corner of the world. Then Elizabeth moved across the country for work, rarely visiting. And James, my steady, dependable James, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He was gone within 6 months, leaving me alone in our too-big house with too many memories. Robert suggested I move in with him and Melissa. "It makes financial sense, Mom," he'd said. "We can rent out your house, and you'll have help if you need it." It seemed logical, practical. I sold most of my furniture, rented out the Victorian to a young family, and moved into Robert's guest room. At first, things were fine. I helped with my grandchildren, cooked meals, tried to make myself useful. But gradually, I noticed the sideways glances when I mentioned a doctor's appointment, the sighs when I asked for a ride to the pharmacy. I became increasingly aware that I was seen not as a contributor to the household, but as a burden. What they didn't know, what I had never told them, was that James and I had been more financially savvy than they assumed. My teacher's pension, James's life insurance, our modest investments. I wasn't wealthy, but I wasn't destitute either. I had options they never bothered to ask about because they had already decided who I was, a helpless old woman who needed their charity. As I sat in the back of the taxi that day, watching familiar streets pass by, I made a decision. I would not go quietly to Golden Sunset to wither away in a sterile room. I would show them exactly who Claudia Reynolds really was. Golden Sunset Retirement Home smelled of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables. My room, paid for by Robert and Melissa, they repeatedly reminded me during their infrequent visits, was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the parking lot. The walls were a pale institutional green that reminded me of hospital corridors. "You'll adjust, Mom," Robert said during his first visit, 2 weeks after dropping me off. "Everyone says this is one of the best facilities in the area." I smiled politely, noting how he checked his watch every few minutes. "And how is the house? Are the children enjoying my old sewing room?" "Oh, yes," he replied, brightening. "Melissa has turned it into a home office, and we're thinking of renovating the kitchen next spring." "Renovating?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "That's a big project." "Well, the rental income from your house is helping." "Smart move, Mom. Buying that place when property values were so low. It's worth 3 times what you paid for it now." I nodded, sipping the lukewarm tea provided by the facility. "Your father was always good with investments." What I didn't mention was that I had already contacted my longtime attorney, Harold Winters. The day after being deposited at Golden Sunset, I had taken a taxi to his office. "Claudia," Harold had said, his bushy eyebrows rising in surprise. "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right?" "No, Harold, it isn't," I replied, settling into the familiar leather chair across from his desk. "I need your help." I explained the situation, how Robert and Melissa had essentially evicted me, how they were collecting the rental income from my house while paying the minimum for my care, how they spoke about renovations as if the house would eventually be theirs. "But the house is still in your name," Harold confirmed, reviewing my file. "Yes, and I want to keep it that way. In fact, I want to make some changes." Over the next month at Golden Sunset, I made friends with a few of the residents, particularly Edith, a former bank manager with a sharp mind and sharper tongue, and George, a widower who still drove his own car and often snuck out for real coffee, not this brown water they serve here. Through George, I arranged trips to meet with Harold, to visit my bank, and to check on my house. Always when Robert and Melissa were at work, the tenants, a lovely young couple named the Johnsons, were surprised to meet me. "Your son told us the owner had moved to Florida," Mrs. Johnson said, inviting me in for tea. "Did he now?" I replied, noting how they had maintained the garden I loved. "How interesting." Meanwhile, Robert's visits became less frequent. When he did come, it was always with news about how they were improving my house or how expensive my care was becoming. "The medication co-pays are really adding up, Mom," he mentioned during one visit. "And Melissa thinks we should consider moving you to a shared room. It would save quite a bit." I reached for his hand, patting it gently. "Don't worry about the money, dear. I'm sure everything will work out just fine." He looked relieved, assuming I was acquiescing to their plans. In reality, I was setting in motion a plan of my own, one that would shock them to their core. "You're doing what?" Edith exclaimed, nearly spilling her contraband sherry. We were sitting in her room at Golden Sunset, having what we called our evening salon, a small rebellion against the facility's 8 p.m. quiet hours. I'm buying back my house, I repeated calmly. Well, technically, I'm buying the house Robert and Melissa live in. George whistled low. Claudia Reynolds, you are full of surprises. I smiled, feeling more alive than I had in months. Harold has been negotiating with the bank. Robert has no idea that the house they've been living in, the house they kicked me out of, is going into foreclosure. The story was complicated, but not uncommon. Robert and Melissa had purchased their home at the height of the market, stretching themselves thin financially. Then came the economic downturn, Melissa's reduced hours at work, and their increasingly lavish lifestyle. They had taken out a second mortgage, fallen behind on payments, and now the bank was quietly looking to sell the property before formal foreclosure proceedings began. But how can you afford it? Edith asked, practical as always. James and I lived through the recession of the 80s. I explained. We learned our lesson about debt. Our house was paid off 15 years ago. My teacher's pension is modest, but steady. And James left me well insured. I paused, remembering my husband's insistence on financial planning. Plus, I've been receiving the rental income from my house. The portion Robert actually forwards to me, that is. What I didn't mention was the small inheritance I'd received from my aunt last year. Money Robert didn't know about, because I'd sensed even then that something was off in our relationship. Harold found me a good deal on their house. The bank is eager to avoid a lengthy foreclosure process, especially with the market softening. I can buy it for less than they paid originally. And they have no idea? George asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. None whatsoever. Robert thinks I'm a helpless old woman who doesn't understand modern finances. I took a sip of sherry, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. He forgets that I balanced our household budget for 40 years and taught economics for a semester when the regular teacher was on maternity leave. My plan was simple but effective. I would purchase Robert and Melissa's house through a limited liability company Harold had set up for me. They wouldn't know I was their new landlord until everything was finalized. Meanwhile, I had given notice to Golden Sunset that I would be leaving in 30 days. What about your house, the Victorian? Edith asked. The Johnsons' lease is up in 2 months. They're lovely people, but I'll be moving back in. It's time to reclaim my life. George raised his paper cup of sherry. To Claudia, proving that old dogs not only know the old tricks, but can learn some devastating new ones. We laughed, and for the first time since James died, I felt a sense of justice on the horizon. They had discarded me when I became inconvenient. Soon they would learn that I was anything but useless. The first hint Robert had that something was amiss came 3 weeks later. He arrived at Golden Sunset for his monthly obligation visit, carrying a small plant and wearing the distracted expression of someone who had more important places to be. Mom, we need to talk about your finances. He began without preamble, settling into the visitor's chair in my room. Oh, I kept my voice neutral, continuing to fold the laundry I'd hand-washed in my bathroom sink. Another small act of independence the facility frowned upon. The property taxes on your house have gone up. And with the cost of your care here, he trailed off, his implication clear. My resources were dwindling, and I should be grateful for his management. That's interesting, I replied, smoothing a pillowcase. I paid those taxes last week. His head snapped up. What do you mean you paid them? How? Online banking, Robert. It's quite convenient. I smiled at his confusion. In fact, I've taken over all my financial affairs again. Harold has been very helpful. Harold, your lawyer? His voice rose slightly. Mom, why would you need a lawyer? I've been handling everything. Yes, you certainly have been. I set aside my laundry and looked him directly in the eyes. Something I noticed made him increasingly uncomfortable these days. Robert, I've decided to move out of Golden Sunset. That's not possible, he said quickly. You need the care they provide here. Where would you even go? Home, I said simply. My lease with the Johnsons ends next month, and I'll be moving back into my house." The color drained from his face. "But we've been using that rental income to pay for this place, and we've made improvements to the property. Assuming what, Robert? That because I'm old, I would simply hand over my largest asset to you." My voice remained calm, but I felt a lifetime of strength flowing through me. "The Victorian is my home. I never agreed to give it to you." He stood up, pacing the small room. "This is ridiculous. You can't live alone. You're not capable. I managed quite well before you convinced me to move in with you." I reminded him, and then decided I was too much trouble to keep around. His face flushed. "That's not fair. We did what was best for everyone." "Best for everyone, or best for you and Melissa?" I asked quietly. He had no answer for that. Instead, he changed tactics. "Fine, move back if you want. But we've already spent the next 3 months of rental income on your care here and some repairs to the house. You'll need to reimburse us." I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "I think you'll find that won't be necessary. In fact, Robert, I believe you and Melissa might soon have some financial concerns of your own to worry about." "What's that supposed to mean?" His voice had an edge of panic now. "Just that change is coming for all of us," I said, standing to signal the end of our conversation. "Give my love to Melissa and the children. I'll see myself out of Golden Sunset. No need for you to concern yourself with the arrangements." He left in confusion, already pulling out his phone to call Melissa as he walked down the hallway. I watched him go, feeling not triumph but a deep sadness. How had we come to this? When had my son, the little boy who once brought me dandelions and called me his mommy angel, become this stranger who saw me only as a financial liability? But beneath the sadness was resolve. The next phase of my plan was about to unfold, and Robert would soon discover exactly what his mother was capable of. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my daughter, Elizabeth. Our relationship had grown distant after she moved to Seattle for her career in technology. But unlike Robert, she had never been cruel, just absent, wrapped up in her own life 3,000 miles away. "Mom?" Her voice sounded surprised when she answered. "Is everything okay? It's late there. Everything's fine, dear," I assured her, settling onto my narrow bed at Golden Sunset. "I just wanted to hear your voice." We talked for nearly an hour, longer than we had in years. I told her about Golden Sunset, about Robert and Melissa's behavior, and about my plans to reclaim my independence. "I had no idea," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Robert told me you wanted to move into assisted living because the house was too much to manage." "That's not quite how it happened," I replied gently. "I should have checked with you directly." "I'm so sorry, Mom." There was genuine regret in her voice. "Do you want me to come out there? I can take some time off work. Actually, that might be helpful," I admitted. "Not right away, but perhaps in a few weeks. There might be some family discussions that would benefit from your presence." After promising to visit soon, Elizabeth asked the question I'd been dreading. "Does this have something to do with Dad's will? Robert mentioned there was some confusion about the house." I closed my eyes, feeling a fresh wave of anger. "What exactly did Robert tell you?" "Just that Dad had wanted to make sure the Victorian stayed in the family, and that you were having trouble managing the finances. He said he was helping you sort everything out." "Elizabeth," I said carefully, "your father's will was very clear. He left everything to me, with you and Robert as equal beneficiaries after I'm gone." There was no confusion. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, Elizabeth said, "I think I'll come out next week instead of waiting. It sounds like there's a lot I need to understand." After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking at old photos on my phone. There was Robert at his high school graduation, beaming with pride as his father adjusted his cap. Elizabeth on her wedding day, radiant despite the marriage that would later end in divorce. Family Christmases, summer vacations, ordinary moments that had seemed eternal at the time. Where had it all gone wrong with Robert? Had I spoiled him? Had James and I somehow failed to instill the values we thought we were teaching? Or was it Melissa's influence, her constant striving for status and possessions? The next morning, I met with Harold again. He had news. The bank has accepted your offer on Robert's house. He informed me, sliding the paperwork across his desk. Once you sign these documents, Reynolds Property Holdings LLC will officially own the property at 1428 Oakwood Drive. And they still have no idea? Harold shook his head. The bank is required to inform them that the property has been sold. But not to whom. They'll receive formal notification next week, along with information about their new landlord and updated payment instructions. I signed where indicated, my hand steady despite the magnitude of what I was doing. Claudia, Harold said gently, are you sure about this? It's not too late to reconsider. I thought about Robert's dismissive attitude, about being told I was useless, about being discarded after a lifetime of giving. I'm sure, Harold. Sometimes people need to learn that their actions have consequences. As I left his office, I felt no joy, only a grim determination. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And perhaps, if I was honest with myself, about teaching my son one final, necessary lesson. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than I expected. I was packing my few belongings at Golden Sunset when my phone rang. Robert's name flashed on the screen. Is this some kind of sick joke? He demanded without greeting. Hello to you too, Robert. I replied calmly, continuing to fold a sweater. Don't play innocent. We just got a letter saying our house has been sold to some company called Reynolds Property Holdings. This has you written all over it. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Yes, I purchased your house, Robert. The bank was quite motivated to sell, given your financial situation. His breathing was heavy on the other end of the line. How dare you? How could you possibly afford? He stopped abruptly, and I could almost see the realization dawning. You've been planning this all along, haven't you? Playing the helpless old lady while going behind our backs. Going behind your backs? I repeated, my composure finally cracking. Like when you told me I was useless and shipped me off to this place? Or like when you lied to your sister about your father's will? Or perhaps like when you told my tenants I had moved to Florida so you could pocket more of my rental income? Silence. Robert, I gave you everything a mother could give. I supported your dreams, celebrated your successes, comforted you through failures. And in return, when I needed you most, when I was grieving your father and feeling lost, you saw me as nothing but a burden to be managed. That's not true, he protested weakly. Isn't it? You're useless to us now, Mom. Those were Melissa's exact words the day you dropped me off here. Did you think I wouldn't remember? More silence then. What happens now? Are you evicting us? No, Robert. Unlike you, I don't discard family when they become inconvenient. You can continue to live there. As my tenants, the rent will be fair market value, and I expect it to be paid on time. This is insane, he sputtered. We can't afford market rent in that neighborhood. You know that? Then perhaps you shouldn't have taken on a mortgage you couldn't manage while simultaneously renovating your kitchen and buying new cars, I suggested. Financial responsibility was something your father and I tried to teach you. Where are we supposed to go? The panic in his voice was palpable now. That's for you to figure out. Just as I had to figure out my life when you left me at Golden Sunset. By the way, I'm moving back into my house next week. The Johnsons have been kind enough to accommodate my early return. Mom, please, he began, but I cut him off. I'll expect you and Melissa at my house for dinner this Sunday. Elizabeth will be there too. We have a great deal to discuss as a family. I ended the call before he could respond, my hands shaking slightly. This confrontation had been necessary, but it brought me no pleasure. The hurt in Robert's voice, beneath the anger and indignation, was still the hurt of my child. And that knowledge cut deep. Edith found me sitting quietly, staring at the phone. Did you drop the bomb? She asked, settling beside me. Yes, I said softly, but I'm not sure if I've just destroyed what was left of my relationship with my son. She patted my hand. Sometimes we have to break things completely before we can rebuild them properly. You're giving him a chance to see himself clearly, maybe for the first time. I hope you're right, I whispered, looking out the window at the spring afternoon. I truly hope you're right. Sunday arrived with ominous storm clouds gathering on the horizon, a fitting backdrop for the dinner I had planned. I had spent the past 3 days settling back into my Victorian home, reacquainting myself with its creaks and sighs, running my hands over the banister James had lovingly restored decades ago. Elizabeth had arrived from Seattle the previous evening, her face lined with concern and jet lag. We had stayed up late, talking through years of misunderstandings and distance. I should have been here, she said repeatedly. I had no idea things had gotten so bad with Robert. We all make choices, I told her, not wanting to shift blame from one child to another. What matters is what we do now. Together, we prepared a simple meal: pot roast with roasted vegetables, Robert's favorite as a child, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The familiar routines of cooking in my own kitchen again brought a comfort I hadn't realized I'd been missing. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Elizabeth answered while I remained in the kitchen, gathering my strength for what was to come. Robert and Melissa entered like reluctant visitors to a funeral home, their faces masks of controlled resentment. The children, my grandchildren, had been left with a sitter, I noted with a pang of sadness. Mom, Robert acknowledged stiffly when I emerged from the kitchen. Melissa said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. Thank you for coming, I said, gesturing toward the dining room where the table was set with my best china. The set James and I had received as wedding gifts and used only for special occasions. Dinner is ready. The first 15 minutes were excruciating. We ate in near silence, the only sounds the clink of silverware against plates and the occasional murmur of appreciation for the food from Elizabeth. Robert pushed his pot roast around without eating much, while Melissa maintained her frigid silence. Finally, Elizabeth set down her fork. This is ridiculous. We're family. We need to talk about what's happened. What's happened? Melissa said icily, breaking her silence. Is that your mother has decided to punish us for trying to help her? I set down my water glass carefully. Is that how you see it, Melissa? That asking me to leave my son's home and placing me in a retirement facility against my wishes was helping me? You needed more care than we could provide, Robert interjected. We have careers, children. I understand having busy lives, I replied. What I don't understand is why you lied to your sister about your father's will, or why you told my tenants I had moved to Florida, or why you were planning renovations to my house as if it was already yours. Robert had the grace to look ashamed, especially with Elizabeth's shocked gaze now fixed on him. You did what? Elizabeth demanded. It wasn't like that, he protested weakly. I was trying to manage everything. Mom's care, the house, our finances. Things got complicated. Complicated, I repeated. Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. Another might be deceptive or greedy. Melissa pushed back her chair abruptly. I don't have to sit here and be insulted in this way. You have no idea the sacrifices we made to take you in, Claudia. Sacrifices? I felt a lifetime of patience finally snap. Let me tell you about sacrifices, Melissa. Sacrifice is working 2 jobs so your children can have new school clothes. Sacrifice is staying in a marriage through difficult times because you made a commitment. Sacrifice is putting your dreams on hold to care for aging parents. Something I did for both my mother and James's father in this very house. I stood up, my voice steady despite the emotion coursing through me. What you did wasn't sacrifice. It was calculation. You took me in because you thought it would benefit you financially. And when it became inconvenient, you discarded me. Robert stood as well, his face flushed. That's not fair, Mom. We did the best we could. Did you? I asked quietly. Did you really do your best? Because from where I stand, your best seems to have involved lying, manipulation, and treating your mother like a burden, rather than a person deserving of dignity and respect. The room fell silent. Outside, thunder rumbled, the promised storm finally arriving. Elizabeth cleared her throat. I think we all need to take a step back. Mom has every right to be hurt and angry, and she also has every right to do what she's done with her property. Easy for you to say. Melissa snapped. You've been 3,000 miles away while we've been dealing with everything. You're right, Elizabeth acknowledged, surprising us all. I haven't been here. That's on me, and I'm sorry for it. But that doesn't excuse what you two have done. Robert sank back into his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. So what happens now? You own our house, Mom. Are you going to evict us? Make us homeless to teach us a lesson? I returned to my seat, folding my hands on the table. No, Robert. That was never my intention. What I want is for you to understand what you did to me. How it felt to be treated as if my life had no value beyond what was convenient for you. I took a deep breath. You can continue to live in the house, but there will be conditions. The storm outside intensified as I laid out my terms, rain lashing against the windows like nature's punctuation to my words. First, I began, you will pay rent, not market rate as I initially suggested, but an amount that reflects what you can reasonably afford, while still recognizing the property's value. Robert and Melissa exchanged glances, some of the tension visibly leaving their shoulders. Second, you will both attend family counseling with me. We need to address the breakdown in our relationship with professional help. Melissa opened her mouth as if to object, but Robert placed a hand on her arm, silencing her. Third, I will be spending regular time with my grandchildren, not as a babysitter or a convenient helper, but as their grandmother who loves them and deserves to be part of their lives. And fourth, I continued, my voice softening slightly, you will acknowledge that my life and my choices are my own. I am not an extension of your family unit to be managed or a problem to be solved. I am Claudia Reynolds, a woman with her own identity, capabilities, and rights. The dining room fell silent except for the storm's percussion. Elizabeth nodded approvingly from across the table. And if we don't agree to these terms, Melissa finally asked, her voice tight but no longer openly hostile, then you'll have 60 days to find new housing, as specified in the lease agreement Harold has prepared. I replied calmly, I don't want that outcome, but I will not be treated as I was before. Those days are over. Robert stared down at his barely touched dinner. You really bought our house, he said, more to himself than to me. I still can't believe it. Believe it, I said. Your father and I taught you about financial responsibility, about saving for the future, about living within your means. Somewhere along the way, you forgot those lessons. Perhaps this situation will help you remember them. This feels like punishment, Melissa muttered. No, I corrected her. This is consequence. There's a difference. Elizabeth, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. I think Mom's terms are more than fair, considering what happened. She could have simply evicted you, but instead she's offering a path forward, one that preserves your housing stability while addressing the real issues in this family. Robert finally looked up, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. Did you plan this all along? From the moment from when you moved to Golden Sunset? I shook my head. No. At first, I was simply hurt and confused. I couldn't understand how my own son could treat me that way. I paused, remembering those dark early days at the facility. But then I realized that allowing myself to be victimized wouldn't help anyone. Not me, not you, not your children. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is hold each other accountable. The apple pie sat untouched as we continued our difficult conversation. There were tears from all of us at various points. Old wounds were exposed, painful truths acknowledged. It wasn't neat or easy, but it was necessary. As the evening drew to a close, Robert asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Do you think you can ever forgive us, Mom?" I looked at my son. Not the man who had discarded me, but the boy I had raised, the child I had loved unconditionally through every stage of his life. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Robert. It's a process. We've taken the first step tonight, but there's a long road ahead of us. As they prepared to leave, I handed Robert an envelope. "The lease agreement," I explained. "Review it with Melissa, and let Harold know if you have questions." He took it wordlessly, his expression unreadable. At the door, to my surprise, he turned and embraced me, awkwardly at first, then with genuine emotion. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." I held my son, feeling the years between us, the good and the bad, the love and the hurt. "I know," I said softly. "I know." After they left, Elizabeth and I sat in the living room, listening to the storm gradually subside. "Do you think it will work?" she asked. "Do you think they'll really change?" I gazed at the family photos arranged on the mantel, snapshots of happier times that I hoped might someday return. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I do know that we had to try. Family is worth fighting for, even when it's broken." Elizabeth squeezed my hand. "You're remarkable, you know that? Most people in your position would have just sought revenge." I smiled, thinking of Edith and George back at Golden Sunset, who had cheered me on through this entire process. This isn't about revenge. It's about restoration of my dignity, of our family bonds, of the values your father and I tried to instill. As we sat together in the quiet aftermath of the storm, I felt something that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope, not certainty, not triumph, but a cautious hope that from these broken pieces we might yet build something new. 6 months later, I stood in my garden, pruning the rose bushes that had been my pride and joy for decades. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. "Grandma, look what I found!" 7-year-old Emma, Robert's youngest, came running across the lawn, her hands cupped carefully around some treasure. Her brother Tyler followed more slowly, his 12-year-old dignity not allowing for such exuberance. I set down my pruning shears and knelt to Emma's level. "What is it, sweetheart?" She opened her hands to reveal a perfect monarch butterfly, its wings gently opening and closing. It was on the ground by the fence. "Is it hurt?" "I don't think so," I said, examining the delicate creature. "Sometimes butterflies rest when they're preparing for a long journey. They migrate south for the winter, you know." "Like birds?" Tyler asked, his interest overcoming his preteen aloofness. "Exactly like birds," I confirmed. "They're more fragile, but just as determined." We found a sunny spot on a flowering bush, and Emma carefully transferred her butterfly. We watched as it rested momentarily, then took flight, rising on the autumn breeze. "It's going home," Emma declared with the certainty of childhood. "Yes," I agreed, watching the splash of orange disappear into the blue sky. Everyone deserves to find their way home. The children were spending the weekend with me, a regular occurrence now under our new family arrangement. Robert and Melissa dropped them off every other Friday, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just for a quick hello. Today they had lingered, and Robert was inside helping Elizabeth prepare lunch, while Melissa had gone to run errands. The past 6 months had been a journey of small steps. The family counseling sessions were difficult at first, raw, emotional, often leaving us all drained. But gradually, session by session, we began to rebuild. Robert acknowledged his actions and the hurt they had caused. Melissa, more reluctantly, came to understand how her attitude had contributed to my isolation. I had my own apologies to make as well, for not communicating my needs clearly, for sometimes treating Robert as the little boy he once was, rather than the adult he had become, for holding on to hurts without addressing them directly. The house situation had stabilized, Robert and Melissa were paying the agreed-upon rent, which was helping them learn to budget more carefully. They had sold one of their cars and cut back on unnecessary expenses. It wasn't always easy for them, but I saw a new maturity developing in my son as he faced these financial realities. Elizabeth had made changes too. She had negotiated a partial remote work arrangement that allowed her to spend 1 week each month in her childhood hometown. She had rented a small apartment nearby, and our relationship was blossoming anew, with regular dinners and long conversations. "Lunch is ready," Elizabeth called from the back porch. "Tyler, Emma, go wash your hands." The children raced inside, leaving Elizabeth and me alone in the garden for a moment. "Robert seems better today," she observed, helping me to my feet. My arthritis was acting up with the changing weather. "He does," I agreed. "The new job suits him. Less pressure, more satisfaction." After the initial shock of our confrontation, Robert had taken a hard look at his life and made some significant changes. He had left his high-stress corporate position for a role at a local nonprofit, a move that meant less money but more purpose. I was proud of him for having the courage to make that choice. Inside, the kitchen was warm and fragrant, with the smell of homemade vegetable soup, my mother's recipe that I had taught Elizabeth, who had now made it her own with a few creative additions. Robert was setting the table, using the everyday dishes rather than the formal china of our confrontation dinner. How appropriate, I thought. We were moving from the formal, stilted relationship of before to something more authentic and comfortable. "Mom, I found Dad's old chess set in the attic," Robert said as we settled around the table. "I thought maybe I could teach Tyler how to play. Dad taught me when I was about his age." "I think that's a wonderful idea," I replied, touched by this connection to James and the past we shared. As we ate lunch, the conversation flowed naturally. School projects, Elizabeth's work, local news. There were still awkward moments, still the occasional tension when certain topics arose. But we were learning to navigate those waters together. After lunch, while the children helped Elizabeth with the dishes, Robert drew me aside into the living room. "I have something for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "It's not much, but inside was a check. Not for a large amount, but significant nonetheless." "What's this for?" I asked. "It's the beginning of paying back the rental income I kept from your house," he explained, his eyes meeting mine steadily. "I've calculated what I owe you, and I'll be adding to this each month until it's repaid." I started to protest that it wasn't necessary, but stopped myself. This wasn't just about money. It was about accountability, about Robert taking responsibility for his actions. To dismiss it would be to diminish the importance of that growth. "Thank you," I said instead, folding the check carefully. "This means a great deal to me." He nodded, understanding the deeper significance. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night, about consequences versus punishment. You were right. I needed to face the consequences of my choices." From the kitchen came the sound of children's laughter and the clatter of dishes, the ordinary, precious sounds of family life. "You know," I said, "your father used to say that the measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes, but in how they respond when they realize they've made one." Robert smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "He was a wise man." "Yes, he was," I agreed. "And he would be proud of you now, Robert. Not because you're perfect, but because you're trying to be better." Later that evening, after Robert and Melissa had picked up the children and Elizabeth had returned to her apartment, I sat alone in my garden as twilight descended. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and the neighborhood was settling into its nighttime rhythm. I thought about the journey of the past year, from the pain of rejection to the satisfaction of standing up for myself, from the bitterness of betrayal to the tentative sweetness of reconciliation. It hadn't been easy, and our family was still healing, still finding its new shape. But as I sat in the garden James and I had tended together for so many years, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had reclaimed not just my home, but my voice, my dignity, my place in the family I had helped create. You were right, James, I whispered to the evening air. Life does come full circle. The butterfly we had released earlier suddenly reappeared, circling once around the garden before continuing on its journey south. I watched it go, this fragile creature, with the strength to travel thousands of miles to find its way home. Like that butterfly, I had weathered storms and found my way back to where I belonged, not as a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved, but as Claudia Reynolds, mother, grandmother, teacher, gardener, survivor. They had called me useless, but I had proven my worth, not just to them, but more importantly, to myself. And in doing so, I had given my family the chance to remember who we really were beneath the misunderstandings and mistakes. People who, despite everything, still loved each other enough to try again. That, I decided as the stars multiplied overhead, was the greatest victory of all.